All right, great. So we'll kick it off here today. Welcome on behalf of the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association to our next installment of the Business Builders series, Cutting Through the Red Tape, a webinar discussion on navigating the final steps to receive your permit and begin operations, including using Metrc, setting up tags, employee badging, and more. Next slide. I know a lot of folks here are familiar with the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association. At a high level, the NJCTA is the only trade association in New Jersey comprised exclusively of the licensed operators. The NJCTA was founded in 2020 and is comprised of the state's permitted medical and adult use cannabis operators. The NJCTA's mission is to ensure that the legal cannabis marketplace is not only safe, accessible, and affordable, but also equitable and just. To achieve this, the NJCTA strives to shape public policy and encourage the implementation of thoughtful and responsible cannabis policy in New Jersey, and serves as a singular voice before the executive branch, legislature, Cannabis Regulatory Commission, and media on the complex matters that impact our industry. And I think, to put it more bluntly, and I think as you'll hear from our speakers today, we're also just kind of a clearinghouse of best practices, working through problems and continuing to refine and tweak this experience of what it is to be cannabis operators here in the state of New Jersey. Obviously, cannabis has been here in New Jersey now for about a decade, but we've really only seen that explosive growth realistically over the last 4 years. So as the NJCTA, we like to bring together operators and kind of share that experience, share those best practices. And as it relates to the Business Builder series, certainly focus on sharing that collective experience and wisdom with the ever-increasing number of license holders, and especially social equity and diversely owned license holders here in the state of New Jersey. So let me kick it off, and I'll give a very quick background of our speakers here today. Two of my favorite people in the NJCTA. First, a little background on Sarah Trent. Sarah is the founder and CEO of New Jersey's first standalone women-owned dispensary to come to the state of New Jersey. Sarah has grown Valley Wellness from a medical-only dispensary to an expanded ATC, servicing both medical and adult use patients in Raritan, New Jersey. Sarah has also since been awarded and is in the process of building out a cultivation license. Sarah began her career as a staff attorney to the Legal Aid Society of New York City, and is also the founder of NJ Cannabis Certified, one of the first job training courses in the cannabis industry in the state of New Jersey. With the NJCTA, Sarah is the chair of the Operations Support Committee. We also have James Froelich here with us. James is the Chief of Staff of Breakwater Treatment and Wellness, one of the original 6 alternative treatment centers in the state of New Jersey, and one of the only ATCs in the state still exclusively operating in the medical program. Breakwater has cultivation, manufacturing, and retail operations in Cranberry, New Jersey, as well as a satellite dispensary in Roselle Park. Breakwater is one of the founding members of the NJCTA, with James serving as its trustee since the association's inception. James also currently serves as a co-chair of NJCTA's policy committee. So I'll open it to both Sarah and James. And again, many people in the audience are already familiar with the NJCTA, but with the title of the webinar in mind, Cutting Through the Red Tape, if you could give the audience a little color as to how NJCTA members share best practices with respect to operations. And if you would also share a little bit of color about the committees that you both chair, and the role of those committees in that process. So Sarah and James, whoever wants to take that one first.
Let Sarah go first.
Sure, ladies first. Thank you, James. Yeah, the name of our committee has changed a couple of times. I've been a member of the NJCTA for since we were licensed. So we are just now hitting our 1-year anniversary. So been with the NJCTA for a year. It's been really valuable for Valley Wellness to be a part of the discussions, that the operators have been having for 10 years prior, because they've been, the 10 or 12 operators that have been active in the space prior to the 2019 awardees have a lot of experience. And so I was really anxious to become part of those conversations, if not to learn from their maybe mistakes or mishaps, or, and learn what they have gone through. And through my conversations with them, just being a part of all of the committees, and James will talk about the policy committee in a minute, I was able to help bring those issues to the forefront with really 2019 operators and now adult use retailers and cultivators that are joining our group. And so I head up the operations support committee. Really what we do is, we're talking, and James will talk about the policy committee in a minute, we're talking about day-to-day operations. I will still admit to you that most days I feel like I am underwater. I may not appear to you like that, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But I have very little time to delegate to bigger policy issues. I'm still a very small company. I'm in store every day. I decide what sales to run. I decide what purchasing is done. And so the operations support committee talks about what we have to do on a day-to-day basis to run our facilities. And really over the course of the last year, those conversations centered around how do we get open, right? We have this, provisional license or this permit, but how do we get our final permit, which is like, how do we open our doors? So I'll pass that to James, because I don't want to get too far ahead and answer further questions down the line.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'd echo that sentiment a lot. A lot of times, even just as a sanity check, right? And it's nice having some of the smaller operators, and independent operators come on board, like Sarah, who are there. It's a different group. There's a lot of people with different experience in what they're bringing. There's a lot of people who have more of that traditional government policy experience. I'm trying to be somewhere in the middle where I'm here every day and trying to do those daily things. So it's good to get really varied perspectives. It's also good to get some of the smaller local operators in there as well. For a while, it was kind of on a lonely island there in terms of, for the most part, in terms of locally owned operators. But it's just a wealth of knowledge, and we kind of get to share that all with each other. And look, the reality is the industry is very hard. I've felt close to underwater for almost the entire time I've been here, which is about 6.5 years now. So it's good to just kind of commiserate and kind of, are you guys seeing this? What's going on with this? And just kind of, it's really good to get together. The policy committee is really great, where we can look at, what's coming down the pipeline in terms of legislation or what the CRC is saying, and kind of get together on what's our thoughts on this as a whole. And like, to be clear, we're not always going to agree. There is a broad diversity of opinions. What's good for one company may not be good for another, but try to get to that consensus overall. What can we all agree is going to be good for the industry and for everyone? So it's really a nice sort of think tank. I love kind of nerding out on cannabis. I could talk for entirely too long about it, but we get to do that a little bit, right, in policy. So it's cool stuff, kind of trying to push for things that'll be good for everyone and build a really strong cannabis industry in New Jersey, while also talking about cannabis. So it's been a really great resource.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add one other thing about, not about either committee in general, but about the NJCTA. Right now, the NJCTA is the only operator, as Mike said, the only operator-based trade group. And so, as me, as a, one retailer, you really do feel out there on an island sometimes. Like, how am I going to get this changed? Like, how am I going to get the CRC to hear me that this is a real issue? Not only is it a sanity check, you can say, okay, is this driving anybody else crazy? And if it is, like, what are we going to do as a group collectively to try and effectuate change? Because we are on the forefront every day. So if we do not bring these issues to the regulators' attention, they're never going to know that it is an issue, or that they could do something to help us, make lives better, easier for us in store.
You guys touched on so many great points just at the outset, and I know we'll flesh it out in the questions to come. But a couple salient points come out of that, right? One is that difference, Sarah, as you framed it, you and James framed it on day-to-day issues and problems and long-term policy, statutory, regulatory problems, right? And having, really like those dedicated committees that say, well, we can't just have one committee solving all problems because there's too many problems on the bigger side versus the smaller side, right? But they're all equally big problems. It's just how do you divide and conquer? And I think your two committees in particular do a spectacular job on that. The other big thing too, and you talk about, James, I appreciate you saying underwater for probably close to a decade now, right? Which is, even though on paper the New Jersey industry has been here for 10 years, or on paper we've had the adult use regulations here for almost 3 years now. Realize it's not just this isn't just a new industry for operators or new rules to be interpreted. It's also a new rollout for the regulators themselves, right? And that's the other place where, as Sarah pointed out, consensus really plays such a big role, because you can have a rule that's extremely well intentioned. You can have a rule that is exactly modeled by the statute. That same rule can be exactly wrong for 10 different other reasons, for practical reasons, for implementation reasons, for interpretation reasons, right? And that's the other big thing too of we think of an agency or the state like a monolith. It's one thing with one interpretation. But really, as we're seeing with the explosion of the industry of 100 plus different operators now, there's even that many more individual regulators who's the point person, especially on day-to-day issues. And that is a lot of what we end up doing in a lot of these committees, which is, hey, by the way, my field monitor said I need to do this with respect to that. Oh, well, that's interesting because my field monitor said I have to do something more onerous or less onerous. And then how do we get to the center of that and saying, hey, look, from a consensus standpoint, we're getting different interpretations, and how do we find the one that's most effective? So I know we're going to jump into more of that in the questions that come. But those are great points, right? Of it's almost that classic line of like, trust but verify, right? Just because you're being told something by the regulator doesn't necessarily mean that that's the most appropriate route, right? And then we can verify as an organization and go back to the CRC. You're doing this. I don't think you really mean to do this, or you've said this, but what have you thought about doing it this way? So much there. But let me jump in with almost like a more of a historical viewpoint. James, I think, one of the most fascinating things of working with you and the trade association is the fact that Breakwater was among the original six, right? So Breakwater has been in operation since I think about 2015 or so.
Started growing in 2014, open
2014, God bless.
2015.
Years.
2014, when it was still highly illegal and highly regulated and the most regulated program in the nation. Yeah. So at a high level, can you give the audience a sense as to how the regulatory infrastructure and the red tape for that matter has changed in the various iterations of this program, including as it evolved, now we can break it up by people, right? Like in the pre-Jeff Brown days to the Jeff Brown days to now we're going to be in the post-Jeff Brown days. How have you kind of seen that rollout from a regulatory operations standpoint over close to a decade now?
Yeah, it's a sea change. We often talk kind of about things happening in dog years where like it changes so rapidly, and you need to let that excite you, because if you only let it stress you out, it's tough to live with, right? So in the beginning, like it wasn't. I think now things have gotten a lot better in terms of like different interpretations, like you were just speaking about with your field monitors. In the beginning, there wasn't a lot of public eyes on the industry, right? When I came on board, I think there was like 20,000 patients in the program. So it wasn't at the front of people's mind what was going on. It was a much smaller group of regulators. There wasn't a lot of focus from the legislature on it. So it was kind of field monitor told you this, doesn't matter what the code says, this is what you need to do. And I feel it's gotten better. We've always had pretty good relationships with our field monitors and our investigators. And that's kind of the most important thing. And that's, I think, the one thing that hasn't changed is you have one reputation. It's really, really easy to screw it up. So the biggest thing is communicating with your field monitor and like, you know, if you're going to disagree respectfully and like walk through it. Like, I understand where you're coming from, but can you explain why this is the case? So, I mean, it's been a big change in terms of their streamline. They've had to deal with explosive growth. So you need to understand on their end too, they're stressed, they're overworked, and it's gotten a lot better, but it's still, they're even busier now. So it's things have gotten more clear. There's a lot of things that have gotten easier to deal with. Back then we were kind of just, everyone was flying by the seat of their pants, and the regulator too. So it was kind of like, can we do this? And they're like, I don't know. There's nothing written about it. Now things are a bit more defined. So in a lot of ways, it's easier, but still quite a lot of challenges.
Well, even I just think of like, you know, I mean, the medical rules, which were last updated maybe 2019, like I don't have them printed out in front of me, but I'm sure they're probably 30 pages of regs maybe, whereas the adult use regs are like 100+ pages of regs, and kind of that whole thing of like what's written versus what's unwritten, right? I think back to law school for myself, and professors saying, the law is written in the black ink, and being a lawyer or even operating in a regulated industry means interpreting the white space between those black letters. And just kind of the sample size of the industry in that same time frame, like 2014. I mean, 2014 in cannabis years might as well be 1900, right? In terms of what we've seen in the industry. And that's one other thing I'll say as a benefit of the trade association, not just kind of sharing best practices of what we're seeing across the state, but also across the country, right? So, NJCTA has single state operators. It also has multi-state operators. And very frequently, especially as it relates to more higher level policy issues, but also on the operational side, it's, hey, look, I know you're taking this interpretation or this position. Let me give you a couple examples as to what sister states or other mature markets are doing on this very issue from an interpretational perspective. And I'll say firsthand, the strength of the regulator, the strength of the Cannabis Regulatory Commission as a whole, is they're very much open to these interpretations, right? Like when you pose it to them, like, and that's, James said it at the top. I mean, one of the big roles of the CTA is to serve as a think tank and collection and dissemination of that information to say, look, you don't got to reinvent the wheel when we have a different state who's rolling out this model, which works just as effectively. So it's, great points you touched on there, James. Sarah, so, we talked about the evolution of this program over the years and the different phases. I mean, as I think of 2022 onward, this has been very much a application state, a licensing and application state, right? And we've certainly seen so much in the form of applications and approvals in New Jersey over the last several years. And regulations, while oftentimes talking a lot to operational requirements, maybe don't necessarily talk as much about that in-between phase of my application's been approved. How do I get the doors open, right? In your experience, what are some of the hardest parts of the process between application approval and final license issuance that the rules probably don't speak to, but become some of the hardest parts of becoming operational?
Yeah, a lot of new retailers that I talk to are really like laser focused on where they're going to get product. And I'm like, stop worrying about that. You have so much work to do to get your doors open. The product is going to be there. You guys will make those connections. The cultivators and manufacturers have enough supply that they want to, get on your shelf. So don't be stressed about that. Concentrate your efforts elsewhere. I think generally speaking, everybody, including myself, underestimates construction project management in general. No matter how long you think that construction project is going to take, add on like a third more time, add on a third 20% more in price. Especially if you've never project managed a construction project before, like myself. I had managed residential home renovations, but had never managed a commercial project. So it was a big learning curve for me. I was really involved in the construction management piece. I'm not saying that that's for everybody, but I do think that it is something that let us get open very quickly because I was on site at the project every day. I saw what materials were on site. I spoke to the general contractor, what's up for this week. We had weekly project management calls with the general contractor, with the architect. How are we going to move this forward? A lot of new retailers think that, oh, I'm moving into a Rite Aid, or I'm moving into, someplace that is maybe already partially built out. And I tell them it doesn't matter. You are going to have to pull, almost certainly, you are going to have to pull building permits to do whatever work you're going to need to do. And you might need to get planning board approval before you go and get those building permits. So developing a relationship with the construction officials in your town is huge. I still have an ongoing relationship with the construction officials. For instance, we just had our yearly fire inspection, and I will admit that we failed that inspection. We had 2 weeks to remedy the things that were wrong. We did remedy them, but we have a great relationship with the fire inspector. So it wasn't like he was imposing a fine. He gave us the ability to fix those things. I called him and I apologized and I said, Mr. Lawson, please come back. Everything's ready to go. And it's nice that I can call and say, hey, we need to pull an electrical permit to do this work. I get that permit issued in a day, 24 hours, because we have a really good relationship. But I'm digressing a little bit. To circle back, the things that you guys should really be thinking about in that 6-month, year-long period between getting that initial provisional license and your real license is construction, your tech stack. So what POS are you going to be using? What e-com provider are you going to be using? Are you going to have loyalty points? Are you going to have a CRM platform? How is that going to integrate with your point of sale and e-com? Are you going to run in-store screens? Is your menu going to be on a TV screen in the store? How are all of these pieces of technology, software, how are they all going to speak to each other? I will say that is something that I personally underestimated. And then, of course, there's preparing your SOPs. Most of you have already submitted SOPs to the state and you have a provisional permit now. So those SOPs have been approved. But let me tell you, those SOPs are only going to get you so far in real life. Because when your staff, your bud tender is downstairs pulling inventory or doing pack outs, that SOP that you got approved by the commission isn't going to tell your bud tender what to actually do in reality. So once you have that floor plan finalized, you're going to start thinking, okay, well, on a day-to-day basis, like, how am I going to do inventory in reality, right? You have to meet certain requirements per the regulations, and that's what you put in your SOP, but that's not a step-by-step process to tell your bud tender what to do. So I always like to make that distinction about SOPs. And then finally, your staffing. Don't leave that to the last minute. We're going to talk about badging in a moment or two. You can't get product on site at your facility until you have your employee badges in hand. So that's something that you really need to, as you're ending construction, you need to be thinking about, okay, if I'm thinking that I want product in store on this day in order to be open 30 days later, I have to have my staff members badged because I can't be taking in product with an unbadged employee, even if I'm not open yet. So I like to call them buckets: construction, tech stack, SOPs, and staffing. Those were my 4 buckets. And I always, every week, I reviewed, what am I doing to move each of those buckets forward?
Well, and you framed it at the top on project management, and what you just said at the end was the perfect bow on that, right? Because it's not just like you identify the buckets, and then how are you meeting the buckets? And in the SOPs thing, I'll say that that's maybe one of the deficits in the CRC application process, right? Because you submit SOPs, and certainly the requirements in the application processes show me that you know every single rule that applies to it, right? And then the flip side of that is, well, SOPs are actually designed to really alert your staff on how to do things. And it's, I always love the way I think it's the same field monitor for the both of you guys, but Pamela Reimers, she'll say, look, there's the regulatory SOPs, and then there's the peanut butter and jelly SOPs. If you were going to tell somebody how to make a peanut butter and jelly, it would be step 1, take out the bread. Step 2, get a knife. Step 3, put on the peanut butter, right? So that's another great point, because you may understand from a regulatory standpoint what your SOPs are telling you to do, but think about your line employee and what are the more basic instructions you're giving them on training and otherwise to get them to that point in time. Now, James, I know we started by saying that and I don't know when the Cranberry dispensary location opened, but I think in the last 2-3 years you opened up your satellite facility in Roselle Park. I mean, did you even notice any differences or changes between that onboarding process and the first one and the like?
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't around for the opening of the Cranberry dispensary, but we did open Roselle Park in September of 22, so year and a half ago. And yeah, I mean, Sarah gave a fantastic rundown. Cannot emphasize enough on like construction. Like, do not think your timeline is going to be the timeline. Do not think your costs are going to be the costs. Like, and just like, look, the last 4 years since COVID, that has been never been more true. And I think another point Sarah brought up that like we're very big on, if you're not going to do it as the owner of your business or the proprietor of your business, it's not going to get done right. You have to be invested and you have to make sure it's done. We're very big on that here. We do almost everything in-house. We fabricate things ourselves. You need to have a good team, and like, yeah, you need to be the one pushing it. If you rely on other people, you're either going to run out of money or it's never going to get done. So those are really big things. For us with Roselle Park, like, be patient, because like, I think we had 3 final inspections. We didn't fail any of them. I don't know why there was 3 final inspections. I don't know why they were called final inspections. But it's just like, okay, breathe. I get it. When can we get you back in? Like, we understand that. They're like, well, no, it just needs to be done then again. It's like, fine. All right, let's do it. So you have to push it. And yeah, again, I would reiterate what Sarah said. You got to be the one pushing it. And yeah, as to the SOPs, like, it stands for standard operating procedure. It's not always standard. In fact, it's not often standard. So you need to have that, and you need to have a team around who's going to come up with solutions. And you have to always foster that, right? Is solution-based thinking, right? There's problems. We're going to be okay. We're selling cannabis, right? At the end of the day, we're going to be okay in terms of like, no one's dying here. So let's fix this problem. We can figure it out, and just kind of always having that solution-based mindset with your team, and remaining calm if you're the leader in there, because if you're stressed out, yelling, any of that stuff, it's not good for the team and it's not going to be productive. So keeping that calm even when the inside is kind of boiling and you're ready to pull your hair out, I think is super important, because it's going to be frustrating. That's a reality.
Well, and that's another great point. And don't let the frustration overcome the reason, right? Like, you talk about the 3 final inspections. Okay, you're saying you have to come back again. Can you please list for me again the 2 or 3 things that you're saying that you want to see next time? And then if you see them next time, you're telling me that there's a strong likelihood, you know what I mean? But like, making sure that the frustration doesn't overcome the point of, what do I got to do next to get to that next phase? That's a great point. And kind of, and Sarah, you touched on this with respect to construction officials, right? Who are in many respects your point person with the municipality, right? We touched a little bit on field monitors a couple minutes ago. But again, like, in terms of CRC regulation and oversight, again, I think sometimes people think that the commission is like a monolith, right? Like, we know who they are as a board. We may even know who senior leadership is, right? But in terms of who you guys as an operator deal with on a day in, day out basis, can you give folks who might be going through this the first time that understanding of like, who are the actual point people that you as an operator are dealing with? And I know a lot of folks are familiar with the term investigator, or even field monitor. But can you give folks a sense as to who those point people are, your kind of level of engagement with them, and kind of the best practices based on that?
Yeah, so depending on where you are in the process, so investigator and field monitor, very different people. I think that's the thing that I want to get across. You are going to have interactions with the investigator very early on in the licensing process. Those are the individuals that are reviewing your PhD, your personal history disclosure forms, your entity disclosure forms, your financial documents. And you are probably going to have an interview with them very early on, even before you get your provisional permit. So a lot of individuals in the process think, oh my gosh, I've been assigned this investigator. They're going to be able to tell me something about my SOPs, or they're going to be able to answer, is this proposed change in my floor plan? Is that okay? Your investigator has no clue. I don't want to use the term like detective but the investigator is more of like a private detective or private investigator.
I always say the cop on the block, right?
Yeah,
like the police officer who's just responsible for walking up and down that block, right?
Yeah. They're there, really making sure that the documents you submitted are in order and doing the due diligence for the commission members, really. I haven't spoken to my investigator in a year, maybe even more than that. I'm not even sure if Mr. Sivitz is there anymore, honestly. But my relationship with the investigator was very pleasant. And I think that others have had varying experiences with investigators, just like your experience with field monitors will vary. But honestly, just have the documents that you filled out. You wouldn't be on the phone with them if you hadn't filled them out. So have them in front of you and, make sure that you are answering appropriately based on what you've submitted. The compliance monitor or the field monitor, on the other hand, is the person that you're going to talk to about your SOPs, about your floor plan, about any changes that you want, about how you're going to get your employees badged, at what point can you take in product. And I think that it is very important from the beginning, just like it was with the fire inspector and town officials, as Mike hinted at, to have a really good relationship with that field monitor. The investigator, not so much, because it's kind of like a one and done kind of thing. But the field monitor, I talk to Pamela almost every day, whether or not it's on the phone or via email. And I think very respectfully, we are on a first name basis because we do speak to each other every day. For me, how I went about developing that relationship is over reporting. And maybe I've toned that back a little bit, but in the very beginning, if I wasn't sure if we should report it, I just reported it. Oh, we're having work done on our camera system. Camera number 53 is going to be down for a couple hours while they're repairing that. Well, I sent her that. And then over time you figure out, well, I need to report this or I don't need to report this. And so I think that we have a good relationship with Pamela because we, like I said, over-reported for some amount of time. And then as the relationship develops, there are things that we do wrong, right? And she's told us that, oh, this isn't tracking to Metrc appropriately. And I've gone to members of the NJCTA and say, well, how are you doing this? Because I must be doing it wrong. And so I can pick up the phone. If I can't wait for one of those policy or operations support committee meetings, I'll pick up the phone and James, how are you handling this? Or another member, like, what are you doing in terms of home delivery? That's where we ran into a lot of issues. So talk to your field monitor, tell them when you're having problems. And the one other thing that Pamela comes to us for, she's seen a couple of times, like, how is Valley Wellness doing this? And so enable to, share our SOP on certain things with Pamela that she has then, shared with other dispensaries that are even outside of the NJCTA network But at that point, my MO is we're being, a good operator by helping other operators in the space.
And I don't want to undervalue what you started with, which is you built a relationship based on trust with her, right? And I think that does go a long way, right? And not that everything's always going to go your way, right? But when you build a relationship based on trust, more likely than not, you get benefits of doubts and more favorable inferences and stuff like that, right? So back to that point from the last question on frustration, there's going to be things that you end up going head to head on with the field monitor at times, but don't let any frustration distract from the fact that you have a relationship with this person, that they're your point person to the agency, and you want to maintain that good professional and certainly trustworthy relationship. James, anything to add there on especially with the relationship on the field monitor?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate that and like realize, look, they have someone they're answering to as well. I've never had a field monitor. Like I said, I've been interacting with a field monitor for 6.5 years. I've never had a field monitor who I didn't feel like they wanted to help us, but like they have to answer to someone at the end of the day, right? We all need to make sure our boxes are checked. So, and that's all based on honesty. And like to Sarah's point, like we report it and like over report until they tell you in writing not to. And like part of that is we also get more leeway because they know what type of operation we run here. So like you have that reputation and you can ruin it in a minute with doing something stupid. So you got to build that relationship, build that trust, and look at it from their perspective. Like as to the inspections in Roselle Park, like they're not looking to bust my chops on it. They're being told this is what you need to do. So it's not their fault. I assume 99% of the time, understand they're trying to work with you and come at it that way. And we've had great relationships, and the ball's in your court on that, in my opinion.
We did get a relevant question here from the audience. What do you do if the field monitor is not responsive or doesn't respond for a long period of time? Who do you go to? Let me at least give my quick take on that. One, probably means that they just don't know the answer to the question in that moment, right? I mean, again, to James and Sarah's point, they have a boss too. Most likely they're running that question back to their boss. And if they're not responding for a period of time, and while you don't want to be annoying, more often than not, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Follow up respectfully, maintain that as best you can. Any other thoughts from Sarah or James on that question?
I will share. Right now, Pamela responds to every single email that we send within 24 hours. I know that is not the case for all field monitors. However, I think that your relationship with the field monitor will change once you are actually licensed. So each of the field monitors, and McQueenie, you can correct, I think they have like upwards of over 20 licensees each assigned to them. And that could even be double that, like 30 or 40 assigned to them.
I think Pamela might have 30 or 40. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about, they have 30 or 40 actually licensed companies to make sure that those ones that are actually licensed selling to the public are being compliant. I think that, and I'm not saying that it's right, but some of the license holders who may be in that provisional phase may be getting a little bit of a second seat to some of the actually licensed operators. So my feeling is be patient, and before you ask a question, make sure that you've done your research, because another reason they might not reply is because they think that question is, and I don't want to use the word not inappropriate, but that you could figure it out yourself. And so if you haven't read that part of the regulation before you ask the field monitor that question, and you're still waiting on a reply, encourage you to read the rules and see if you can figure it out yourself. Something that we do is, instead of asking a question, we propose a solution and ask, and say, this is what we are going to do to fix this. And please tell me if you disagree or have a problem with it. And it changes the narrative a little bit. So I hope that helps.
James, anything other?
I concur with that. I mean, long time is relative, but yeah, you got to follow up respectfully. And it's, take it off their plate too. Like, I know this probably isn't you, that you don't have the answer. I'm sorry, but I have to follow up. I know you told me it's off your desk. Could we please follow up? Like, or is there someone else I should follow up with? I don't want to keep bugging you with this. Because their plates are full. So, look at it from their perspective a little. But at the end of the day, you got to get answers on something, especially if it's an interpretation and you've provided that solution, like Sarah said. I mean, we've waited 5 months for fairly simple approvals on things, and it's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. And it is almost certainly not your field monitor that is dragging their feet on that decision.
Yeah, I mean,
and on the
that one step forward is, if you're this far along in the licensing process, you have general counsel, you have an attorney that you're working with. I'm a lawyer, but I still have general counsel. And the purpose of that is, like, I have a direct relationship with Pamela, but when something needs to be escalated, I then turn that over to my lawyer and say, hey, you need to reach out to general counsel. You need to reach out to, and I know who these people are, and I could send the email to them as well, but I choose not to, because at that point it's an escalation. Look, I'm now paying somebody to reach out to the higher ups. And so that's just been my internal strategy.
Yeah, and I do just want to, both of you guys made the great point, and I want to reiterate it, of especially when it's an interpretational question, like, again, the rules are there for everybody, right? So if you have a question, always think thoroughly about, do I have a question, or am I asking them to confirm my conclusion, right? Like, because think about it, someone asks you a general question, maybe it's taking them time because they got to go back to the rules and review it and cross-reference it with the general counsel's office and things like that, versus, hey, by the way, we saw, we're approaching this issue. Our interpretation of the rules is we can do it because of X, Y, and Z. Here's the cross references to the citations or the guidance document. Can you confirm that this approach is appropriate? That you've now done their homework. You've advanced the ball for them. So that's another great point that both James and Sarah raised. And again, I know we had, I know breakwater is a vertical, and I know Sarah's in the process of getting cultivation, but for the purposes of sticking with retail for a second, obviously, retail businesses are extremely highly regulated, and with that in mind, operating a retail store, what are the biggest compliance items that you focus on in running your retail stores? And what are some of the learning curves you've experienced associated with that, whether it's with respect to Metrc, inventory, staffing, onboarding, security, delivery, things like that? What are some of the compliance elements and curveballs you've learned on the retail side?
James, you take it first, and then I'll go.
Okay.
Stealing your thunder.
My answer will probably be a little less, just because we, look, we're medical only. We're not Metrc currently. For us, for a long time, oversells or allotment errors were like a major issue. It's gotten a little more lenient now, where it's not as big of a deal, where, like, I'm going to have to write a corrective action plan every single time there's a minor oversell. So we've gone away from that. But you got your POS systems, which will go down. There's going to be issues with there. You got to deal with your bank and make sure everything's on point there, right? It's because it's not just the CRC. You need to have all of your providers be on point. Like, are your bank accounts on track? Are you sending them their compliance paperwork that they need? Because if you don't have a bank, that's going to be a major issue for you. So yeah, I can't really speak to Metrc currently, but making sure your staff understands all these compliance things, and also why, right? Like, because if you just tell someone you need to do this and it's very important, you understand it. So for like oversells and those sorts of things, or back before cannabis was adult use legal, like a patient sticker, how important it is for you to be putting the correct patient sticker on that jar, because someone could be arrested if you don't have the patient sticker. As silly as that sounds in today's environment, that was a reality where a very small mistake could have real consequences for someone. So just all those things, and understand, like, explaining the why to your team, because people, if you explain a why to a team, they're much more likely to value that thing that you are asking them to do.
Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, so inventory, man. Inventory. I mean, for busy stores, I'll tell you, on a busy Friday in our fulfillment room, so we run fulfillment style model. I call it the iPad store or the Apple store. We do not keep product out on the sales floor. We have all of our product in the fulfillment room. At the end of the night, all of the carts get rolled into the vault. Everybody told me during construction and planning, your vault is going to be too small. And I tell you, it is so true. I'm actually preparing right now on how I'm going to make our vault bigger. And I'm going to have to pay a $10,000 change fee in order to get the CRC to look at this. And man, I just should have dealt with it 2 years ago. But yeah, I'm going to have to build another vault somewhere in our facility because I just can't manage all of the products that we have. So yeah, for busy stores, our fulfillment room on Friday is chaos. We have people running all over, picking out orders and putting them in the window. Customers get up to the register and they may want to change their mind. You know, they don't want this, they want that, or oops, I ordered an indica when, you know, finally they're talking to a bud tender and really you need it, you would do better getting a sativa. So we have a lot of give backs at the window, and guaranteed inventory is going to be off. That is multiplied dramatically because we have both medical and adult use inventory, and under the current state of regulations, we must maintain completely separate inventory for both medical and adult use. This is something that the NJCTA has been actively working with me and a few other operators on. I think that this is a problem for the medical operators, the medical ATCs. However, to answer Mike's question, which is what do you guys need to be worried about, like compliance wise, and it's inventory. What is like the one thing that the CRC can check, right? And Pamela, we got a notice 2 days ago that we are on high alert that Pamela is coming with her RFID gun to make sure that all of our Metrc tags are in place. So right now downstairs, all of my staff is going through each and every single product bin to make sure that the Metrc tags are appropriately placed. And we're generally compliant, right? But there could be a bin where we might be missing a tag, or we might have 2 or 3 tags. And so maybe an old tag didn't get thrown away. So right now we are cleaning up all of our inventory bins and making sure that the correct Metrc tag is actually physically affixed to the front of the bin. And so going back to like, what's the one thing that Pamela can check? She can go into Metrc at any time. She also has a live feed into our Dutchie point of sale system and can see all of our inventory, all of our packages. She can see if there's a package that we should have closed out at the end of last night, but actually it's still open. And so inventory is really one of the things that the CRC does have a direct eye into from Metrc. And so it is at the top of our compliance list. That said, we have an internal checklist that we've developed. And so Pamela's not she might show up unannounced, but she hasn't to date. And I don't think we have that type of relationship with Pamela. So she's probably going to give us 24 hours notice. And when she gives us that notice, I'm going to pull our checklist that we have in Teams. And, you know, my top managers are going to make sure that everything on that checklist is really in order, ready for Pamela. We're going to have our training records printed out on the bulletin board. We're going to make sure that all of our staff members have actually completed all of the appropriate assigned training. We're going to go through and make sure there's a Metrc tag on every bin. So really preparing for that in advance. And when Pamela has shown up in the past, we've actually shown her that checklist, right? And that's the thing about oversharing. We like, hey, you didn't ask us about any of these things, but hey, look, here it is. This was completed because we knew you were coming here today. You could have checked any of the things on this checklist. We would have been prepared to turn them over to you.
Yeah, and you know, and super important in terms of compliance. The other big thing that I'll flag, and we talked earlier about how, you know, most of the history of the last 3 years has been focused on applications and licensing. Realize how many people they brought on for applications and licensing. The fact that applications are now calming down, they're moving a lot of those people onto the enforcement side, and realize that that's the other reality of operating a regulated business, is that at some point in time, more notices of violations will go out, you know, threats of monetary sanctions. And again, the goal of every business is to operate compliantly. But this agency is already a little bit in the transition from a licensing agency to an enforcement agency. And the numbers bear that out. I mean, I think in 2023, we saw more or less 5 notices of violations issued by the Office of Compliance and Investigations. As of February of this year, there had been 45 issued, right? And that's what we know about. And there's obviously more since then. So compliance isn't just the goal. It's also the mechanism by which you don't suffer any additional fines and things like that. And everything that Sarah just said is also spot on, in the sense of that's where you want your documentation in place, so that when you get hit with a notice of violation and you go back to your corrective action plan, you're going to say, we had this SOP in place, and you know what, maybe a staff member missed it, so we're going to do retraining at this periodic interval, right? So this whole ecosystem does fit together to keep not only your business compliant, but also out of trouble as well. So it does feed into that larger picture. I know we're running a little bit tight on time. I'm going to jump to a more forward-looking question for both Sarah and James. And James, we can start with you. You know, we kind of know the bed that we're sleeping in right now, right? But what changes to regulation or statutory authorities do you think would be most beneficial to cannabis businesses here in the state of New Jersey moving forward?
Yeah.
Aspirational, anything goes.
Sure. So, I mean, for us, it's really important to be and continue to be a local independent company. I think I understand the reason for it, but I think this industry is probably wildly overregulated. And I think that is going to be a really difficult thing for small businesses, right? You need regulation, right? We want safe products. We want tested products. We want a fair market, all of those things. But the more and more regulations you talk about, federal rescheduling, the more and more of that, the harder it becomes as a small operator. So, you know, if you're getting into this, you have to have a mind for the regulations. It's really difficult. So I think we need guide rails, but I'd like to see probably a little less, right? Like you hear Sarah talking about all these things with Metrc, and I don't know if anyone is any safer because there's an RFID tag on every single box of package. I don't. And, you know, like, it is important, right? We don't want diversion. I don't want kids getting this stuff. Like, these things are important, but like really looking at the end of the day, is it accomplishing its purpose? So, but it's like anything, right? Where you have to start out super regulated because people aren't comfortable with it yet. As people get more, it will turn more into a normal business, right? So those are the sorts of things I would like to see more of, where we become a normal business. It's already started to happen a little, but just something that is, you know, it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and just because a rule is there, to your point, doesn't mean it needs to be there for all time, right? I mean, I think what you're touching on too is like this normalization of cannabis, where 2015 totally, like, there wasn't as robust of a cannabis marketplace. You want to prevent diversion and this, that, and the other, and like now cannabis is an adult use social item. Still need controls, but like the question is how much and what is the right mix without crushing smaller operators who might not have that robust budget. Sarah, anything else from your perspective, you know, forward looking, aspirational, what would make the life of a cannabis business operator here in New Jersey a little bit easier?
So we talked about the dual menu thing, and that is something that the CRC has that the regulators have continuously kind of punted back to the legislators, saying that's something that this is a legislative fix. And that really single stream inventory for all operators especially given where the medical market is right now in New Jersey, and I'm going to transition to talking about that in a moment, but I really want to see single stream inventory for the ATCs that are converted. Transitioning to talk about the medical market, the commission has placed, and the state of New Jersey has placed like such this emphasis on the medical patient population. And I don't want to diminish that at all. But I would like to see more support in the form of regulation and legislation to support what the state has, to support this effort to strengthen the medical program. We've seen such a drastic decline in the patient population numbers. And while the commission has really reduced the fee, it's down to like $10 to register for a medical patient card. There are still a lot of fees associated with getting that patient card, primarily seeing the doctor, which usually costs upwards of $100. What can the CRC and the state do about this? From an operator perspective, they must make adult use products available for sale on the medical side where patients do not have to pay tax. There has been a proliferation over the last 3 months of new cultivators and manufacturers. And Valley Wellness, we can sell those products to medical patients, but we have to charge tax. Medical patients don't want to pay tax, and they shouldn't have to pay tax. And me, as a business operator, I am now selling those products to medical patients at a discount. So I am taking, my business is taking a hit on those margins when the state has made such an emphasis on medical patient prioritization. But we, as the business owners, are the ones effectuating that. And I would like to see more support from the state, from our legislatures, and from the regulators on prioritization of medical patients, if that's going to continue. Finally, I did have one more point on this issue because I did prepare for this question, which is, we've started to see small businesses fail, primarily in towns, municipalities that have licensed, in my opinion, too many retailers. So I don't know the exact fix. I don't know the answers, but this needs to be taken into consideration so that the industry at large, so that we don't see the industry suffer because of it. And what I mean by that, small businesses suffer because of it. We're not seeing the MSOs go under. We're seeing mom and pop stores that can't get enough traffic through their doors. So, I think that a consideration of licensing needs to happen. There you go. Thank you, Mike.
Oh, of course. No, thank you guys. And we're not going to jump yet, but if we can jump to the last slide, just so folks know how to further engage with the NJCTA. We'll have our website there. Find us on LinkedIn. Find us on X. It's easy to find me, Sarah, and James if you have any other questions. But we wanted to make sure that folks have that before we jump. Let me, in our 1 minute remaining, let me ask you the most complex and nuanced question possible. And let me ask if you guys can answer it in one question, in one sentence rather. Rescheduling. What does rescheduling mean to Breakwater? What does rescheduling mean to Valley Wellness? Again, the most complex question with the shortest answer. James, any stab on that one?
One sentence. I mean, 280E is massive. The rescheduling isn't going to stop people getting arrested in non-legal states, so it's not fixing that. To me, rescheduling is nothing good except 280E.
Yeah, uncertainty. We don't know exactly how it's going to affect 280E. So yeah, there's potentially, some tax benefits to retail operators, but there's a huge uncertainty because under Schedule 3, a controlled substance is supposed to be sold through DEA, like licensed facilities. And I may not be the best legal expert to talk about this. I might punt it back to McQueenie, but I think that retailers are kind of freaking out. Like, are we gonna have to become a licensed pharmacist or a pharmacy in the state of New Jersey? And is that gonna apply to medical cannabis or adult use cannabis? Or is the DEA going to make an exception of some sort? So from my perspective, huge uncertainty.
And with that, and Sarah just put a perfect bow on the types of things that we talk about in our NJCTA policy committee of here's a proposed and anticipated change. How does the collective interest of license holders in New Jersey want to both respond to and educate legislators and lawmakers and regulators on these specific issues, both what it does and does not do? Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you especially to James and Sarah who provided such invaluable insight. Again, we intend to continue having these series. We will make a recording of this available. But thank you for joining us here today, and thank you for being a part of the conversation of the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association. Thank you, everyone.